I don't know if it means anything, but I have a note that says the meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Okay.
All right. Well, good. I guess we finally got it resolved. We're posting live to Facebook now. And I've got people texting me saying, where is the stream? So anyway, so as I said, my name is Steve Adams. I'm the treasurer on the Hopkins School Board. I'm also co-chair of the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition. And the coalition represents the interest. We're posting live to Facebook now. And I've got people texting me saying, where is the stream? So, anyway, the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition represents the interests of the Hopkins School District at the legislature. And every 2 years, we host a candidate forum for legislative candidates. And usually it's done in person. So this is kind of a new situation for us to have to do it virtually. And please bear with us. I'm sure we'll have some technical issues as we go through the day. The schedule for this morning. Where is it? Yeah. We're starting off with Senate District 44 at 9 a.m. And that includes the Representative District 44B. And then at 10:30, we'll have Senate District 45 and 45B. At 1:30, there'll be Senate District 48 and 48A. And at 3, we'll have Senate District 49 and 49A. And then and 49B. And then at 4:30, it's going to be Senate District 46 and 46A and B. So if you're tuning in to watch any of those, you probably want to tune in at the right time to see your particular Senate district. Yeah.
Minimize the browser with the yellow. Nope, the web browser.
Okay.
There you go. And then you can go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So this is who we are. And this was taken a couple of years ago when we were over at the state capitol. I think this was taken in Patty Akeham's office, actually. So, no?
Nope, I think, no, because I'm not in the picture. So it must have been Cheryl or Lori's
It
office.
was Cheryl's office at that time. Right. And we welcome anyone watching to join the Legislative Action Coalition. All the details are on our website and on our Facebook page. And as I mentioned, this is our schedule for today. We're getting a kind of a late start for Senate District 44, and here are the guidelines for our candidate forum today. Just to let you know that the LAC does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Views expressed are those of the candidates and not the LAC. Purpose of the forum is to provide an opportunity for voters to hear candidates discuss education issues. And questions have been submitted in advance. So we've got some of the, besides the 3 that were submitted to each of the candidates, we'll have some random ones that were selected from input from our constituents. And questions may also be submitted live during the Facebook Live event. So we'll be watching for comments on the Facebook Live page. Guidelines are each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves for an introductory and a concluding statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question presented by the moderator. Our timekeeper, Michelle Pasco, will keep a running timer which will not be displayed on the screen, but she'll keep time for each of the candidates' responses. And I reserve the right to utilize the mute feature anytime a candidate exceeds the time allotment. And candidates will be selected in randomized order to answer the presented questions. And the first question, well, the first respondent will be, according to our random generator, Gary Porter. So for this question, it'll be Gary, then Ann, then Patty, and then Greg. So we'll start with Gary. And the question,
This is Greg Post. I thought we were going to have an opportunity to introduce ourselves.
oh, you're right. I'm sorry. You have 2 minutes to do that. So, so Gary, why don't you go first?
Okay. My name is Gary Porter. I'm a candidate for state representative from District 44B, which covers Plymouth, Minnetonka, and surrounding areas. Woodland, that's the, draw a blank there for a minute. I served 2 terms in the North Dakota State Legislature back in the 90s. At that time, I was also a member of the Education Committee. I look at education as one of the most important issues that legislators face. And I think that as we look at the decades of what has happened in Minnesota, it's a situation that I feel today is that we are lacking. When you look at the amount of money that is being appropriated for our educational system in the state, and you look at the results that we're getting, something is wrong. We pump in a tremendous amount of money into the poorer districts, much more so than we're pumping into the wealthier districts. But yet in the end, we're finding that our educational system, there is a tremendous gap, a learning gap where students in the wealthier districts are about 15 to 20% ahead of students in the poorer districts in this state. So I look at it, the legislature has been a complete failure in trying to bring about a better educational system in this state. And it doesn't make any difference whether the Democrats, DFL, has been in charge of the legislature or the Republicans have been in charge of the legislature. The results have been the same. We're pumping more money into the educational system and we're not getting the results that we need. It's time that the legislature sit back and say, okay, we provided the money. Why aren't we getting the results? And we need to start looking and finding ways to solve this problem so that all students are guaranteed a quality education across the state of Minnesota. We're not going to get equality in Minnesota. That's been the major cry today without a strong educational system providing the opportunities so that all students have a chance to capture a part of the American dream.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Next, we'll have Ann Johnson Stewart.
Morning, and thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Education is one of my highest priorities and one of the reasons that I decided to run for Senate. So again, my name is Ann Johnson Stewart. I'm running for Senate in District 44. I am a civil engineer. Many of you have seen my construction videos. I have worked in the construction industry for my entire career. I also teach at the University of Minnesota in the College of Engineering and Civil Engineering and Construction. I've been there for over 20 years, and I have also taught at Dunwoody Technical College and St. Paul Tech. My husband and I live in Minnetonka. We've lived in the same house for 25 years, and I decided that this is the year for me to run for Senate. Way before Paul Anderson decided not to run, because I have a strong commitment to roads and bridges and our infrastructure. And frankly, I was very concerned that we didn't have an engineer advocating for those things. So roads and bridges, sewer and water is a high priority for me. I also have my undergraduate degree is in environmental engineering. So I also have a strong commitment to the environment. My parents were public school teachers their whole career. I saw them live the life of a public school teacher, and I am still, that impacted me greatly. I still highly value public schools. I wanted to be a teacher, but because I had an affinity for engineering, I chose that career. And after just 5 short years, I landed back as a teacher. So my heart is for teaching. My heart is for education. And like Gary, I think it's a core responsibility of the state and the federal and the local government, of course. So I want to be an advocate for public schools, and I'm happy to be here today. So I teach for a living. I know how to stay within my time, and I'll stop there. End. There we go.
Okay. Thank you, Ann. Next up to introduce herself is Patty Acom.
Good morning, everybody. I am Patty Acom, and I am running for re-election to represent the Hopkins School District in House District 44B. I know this, thank you to the Legislative Action Coalition for having this forum this morning. I know that it's such a challenging time for students and teachers and families with distance learning and all the struggles that entails. And so thank you all so much for giving this opportunity for all of us to speak to you and others in the district. And so appreciate the opportunity. My experience with the Hopkins School District is long and varied. I started here in the district as a student and did K through 12, graduating from Hopkins High School back in the last century, which makes me feel really old. But, and my youngest son, I have 2 kids, and my youngest son just graduated from Hopkins High School last year. So we have definitely done the Hopkins school experience. And even while my kids were in elementary school, I had a naturalist program at Eisenhower Elementary School. So very dedicated. My roots are deep in this community, and my commitment is strong to the Hopkins school community. I will say I'm proud of the work that we accomplished in my first term at the legislature, especially for public schools. We passed a 2% funding increase for each year in the biennium coming, and I'm proud of that. The schools work hard and need more funding to help do that. We also increased the funding and spending in special education, which we all know and understand there's a cross-subsidy funding gap that schools have to make up. And so it's really an important area that as legislators we need to address. And I will say this is in stark contrast to the Republican-led Senate that wanted to give a 0.5% increase in both years in the biennium. So I feel it was a huge success that we got 2%. And there are lots of needs in our schools, and I'm hopeful we can talk about more of those as the morning goes on. Thanks again for having me.
All right, thank you, Patty. And last but not least, Senate candidate Greg Pullis.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. This is the first time that Ann and I have met. We're at least meeting on Zoom. So good morning, Ann. I grew up on the north side of Minneapolis. I was one of 8 kids, and we were poor, but I got a great education. And I ended up at the University of Minnesota, then the University of Minnesota Law School, great institutions. My wife, Michelle, and I have lived in Plymouth for 28 years, 7 kids between us. I eventually ended up at TCF Bank as a general counsel, and I was a general counsel member of the board for over 25 years. Met my best friend there, Bill Cooper, who was the CEO, and he grew up poor in Detroit, and education was his ticket too. So we both got involved in education on the north side of Minneapolis, and our main focus was children of color, making sure that children of color got the same opportunities as we had. Ascension School was our first project, and I have been involved there for 30 years. Ascension School has no achievement gap. It really works there. It's a great institution. We also started a nonprofit that sponsored 17 charter schools, high-performing charter schools. I also served on the governor's commission for standards. And so I'm a math geek. I was on the math committee. I also wrote a book on phonics. I'm big into reading, and I wrote a math standards book. So I'm big on education. I have a passion for education. We have great schools in this district. Our schools are superb. And we're obligated to fully fund those schools, and I would fulfill that commitment at the legislature. I love education. It is my passion. I will go to work on it. I will use that financial expertise, solve this budget problem that we have, $4.7 billion, and still fund education. And I will go to work on that achievement gap. thank you for tuning in this morning.
All right, thank you, Greg. Our first question that was submitted to our candidates. I'm trying to find it on the screen here. Thank you. There's a statement, well, it starts with a statement. Currently, school boards may not start the school year before Labor Day unless there are extenuating circumstances. Also, all types of taxing authorities in Minnesota, which includes cities, counties, school districts, watershed districts, mosquito control districts, et cetera. Of those taxing authorities, school districts are the only type of taxing authority required to conduct a referendum in order to renew or increase a property taxation rate. Do you support locally elected school boards to set their own calendar? Why or why not? And do you support allowing locally elected school boards to renew an existing operating referendum by majority vote of the school board after a public hearing? Please tell us your reasons. And the random generator tells me that the first to go on this question is Patty Acom.
Well, great. Thank you. I appreciate the question. I will say that, you know, before going to the Minnesota legislature, am I muted? No.
No.
Okay. Before going to the Minnesota legislature, I was elected to represent Minnetonka at the city council. And so I certainly know and recognize the importance of local control. And I think, you know, just as all of our communities are different and we have the ability as cities to be able to address the needs of our community, I think school districts are really no different, and they have different needs. And, you know, I serve in 44B, which represents the Hopkins School District, Minnetonka, and Wayzata. And frankly, they have different needs. And so the ability for each district to be able to address the needs of their families and their community is an important asset that they need. So I will say that, you know, our calendar for schools was set a very long time ago. And so there are different needs today than there were a long time ago. And so, you know, we don't have as many farmers here, especially in the metro area. And to be able to start before Labor Day can be a huge benefit for many schools if they want to do that. So I do believe in allowing districts that ability and that flexibility to prioritize those issues for themselves. And, you know, I think as far as being able to extend referendums, I think just as city council members or legislators are elected, school board members are elected as well. And so they can be held accountable to their community for the decisions that they make. And I think the important piece of that is being able to have public engagement. And so if you're having hearings and ways for people within the community to show their support or their concerns, I have no problem with giving schools or allowing schools to have that opportunity rather than taking it to a referendum, which can be very costly and time consuming for schools when what we want them to be doing is educating our students. So,
All right. Thank you, Patty. Next up will be Greg Porter, followed by Ann Stewart and Greg Pullis. So Greg, Gary, I'm sorry.
Okay, I think maybe Greg and I should go on together and do a duet, maybe, to answer the questions. Okay, as far as local control, I've always been a firm believer in local control of our school system. I remember years ago when I was in the North Dakota legislature and the education committee, the tourism industry came and wanted to be able to make sure that the schools did not begin until after Labor Day so that they would have the entire period to be able to flourish in their business, as well as having people to work in the tourism industry. However, even though I kind of agreed with their position, I also agreed with the position that school districts need to be in control of their own house. And I've always believed that. And so as a result, we voted down the tourism industry's request. Each district is different. Each district has its own issues And as a result, one size doesn't fit all. And I think that local control makes sure that each district is able to function as it should. As far as voting, having the people vote on taxation, I believe that the other boards should also be in the same position as the school boards in the fact that all should be voting. If nothing else, they should have the right to be able to refer instead of just taking it and having to wait until the next election to get rid of the school board people who are voting for these higher tax increases. We live in a democracy. Unfortunately, elections are and referendums are expensive, but I think it's what makes our democracy strong. And as a result, I favor continuing the same, the present situation, as well as adding the rest of the boards to that situation.
All right, thank you, Gary. Next, Ann Johnson Stewart.
All right. Well, my answer to both of those questions would be yes. I do believe that schools should be able to control their own district's calendar. I have lots of friends in South Minneapolis, and I already see the very small impact of those students going back to school before the end of the state fair. I don't think it's a big deal. But I think the core question is whether local districts should be able to control their calendar. And the answer has already been stated a few times that yes, in fact, I believe that. And that's based on community needs, cultural kinds of norms, just the needs of the just local communities. So that's a pretty easy question to answer. The one about referendums is a little bit harder, but I do believe that schools should have the ability to renew referendums. I have worked on many referendums for this Wayzata School District, and they do take an enormous amount of energy, time, and money. We've seen that until recently in the rural districts, school referendums only had about a 50% chance of ever passing. And I think this has led to some of our inequities in schools. So if we're relying on passionate school supporters to get public support for schools, that is a big ask. And once we get the referendum passed, I think schools should be able to renew them. School districts, pardon me. I don't know if this question will come up later, I'm sure it will, but obviously those districts who have a healthier or a more robust property tax base don't have to rely on referendums as much as others. And I think that further leads to more inequity in what our schools are able to spend and the revenue they get. So the answer to both of those questions for me is a yes. I think the district should be able to control their calendar, and I think they should be able to extend their referendums.
All right, thank you, Ann. I'm trying to unmute Gary.
Greg.
Or not Gary, Greg. Yes. All right, Greg, you're up. What's your answer to the
Okay,
local
so
control
two questions
question?
here. This is a two-part question. So in general,
Right.
we expect the school board to achieve results. And so to me, generally speaking, I would give the school board control over decisions that impact those results. First question about the calendar. I have no idea why we have this rule that the state sets the calendar. I assume it's because we were all farmers once. Today, you have different needs in different parts of the state. So out in the farm country, they need more days for snow days. I know people up north, they need more days because a lot of the kids make a lot of money cleaning cabins and cleaning resorts. And so I would give absolute authority to the school district to set the calendar. It just makes common sense. They want to start early, they want to start late. However they do it makes absolute sense to me. Second question is a tougher question. You're balancing one. The people in the district are funding these schools, and so they need to have a voice. And so you've got to give them their voice. By the same token, you're expecting the school boards to achieve these results. And so why wouldn't you give them maximum control over the finances? So to me, I would give the school boards the authority to renew these referenda that don't increase the dollar amount, with a couple of conditions. Number one, I think it would make absolute sense to say that in the initial referendum, you've got to disclose the fact that the board has the authority to extend this referendum. So give advanced disclosure of that. And then second, I'd have a fail safe. I don't know what the right percentage is, but if X% of the population files a petition that they object to it, well, then you got to go to a referendum. So I'm for maximum possible control by the school board consistent with giving voice to our people.
All right, thank you, Greg. The next question has to do with the current pandemic. If I can get to it here. Oh, there we go. Oops, too far. Distance learning and the changes to educational delivery during a pandemic have been particularly hard for families with special needs and those students requiring extra support. What are your plans for ensuring that schools are able to meet those needs? And the randomizer says that the first one to answer this will be Ann Johnson Stewart.
So thank you. So I think we could be answering this question whether we're in a pandemic or not. The reality that schools are now being asked to not only teach in person, but also online and hybrid is adding a significant amount of stress, responsibility, and cost, not only to the districts who are having to deliver these classes, but also to the teachers, so much so, and to the parents who are trying to figure this out. The only really the only significant change for this question relating to COVID is now we're asking the schools to do even more. So I could answer this question pre-COVID as well by saying that the way that we need to make sure that schools are able to meet all needs relating not only to disabled students, but to all students is to make sure that they're fully funded. The unfunded special ed mandates are not small. They are $700 to $800 million a year. And if we're asking if we're asking districts to somehow come up with that gap, it has a significant impact on every student in every district. So when I answered this question, I'm, struck by the challenge we're all going to have, those of us that get elected, in the next session of how are we going to balance the budget. For me, this will be a new task. I will be looking to people like Patty Acom and others who have gone through the process before. But the reality is that now more than ever, schools are needing our support to be fully funded. We need to make sure that money that we have for public schools goes to public schools. I will always protect that money and make sure that we look at ways to continue to fund public schools to the full amount. So we have some documentation and some ideas that the DFL is working on this, and I will be happy to learn how I can do my part to support those.
All right, thank you, Ann. In order, the following people will respond to this question: Patty, Greg, and then Gary. So Patty.
Thanks.
You're up.
I even managed to get myself unmuted, so I feel like I'm doing good. Yeah, so I think, as I said in my opening, talking about how proud I am of the work we accomplished in my first term. And part of that was really around the increased funding around the special education cross subsidy. I do think that the pandemic is highlighting some of the inequities that have always been there, but they're just showcasing them in a way that we haven't paid attention to in the past. And so I think it's highly important that we meet the needs of all students. I think that there are a lot of challenges, especially within the special education community, about meeting the challenges that they need, and the one-on-one instruction that is important for them to be able to continue to grow and thrive. And so I think that I don't know that I have all of the answers about the best way we can do that. You know, I think by the time the next legislature starts, or by the time it does finishes up its business, excuse me, the school year will be coming to an end. And so I think there's attention that we need to be paying to it now. I know the school districts, they can't look away from it. They are looking at it every day, square on. The teachers and the families of children who have special needs are struggling. And so we need to do everything we can to support them. And, you know, I'm proud of the additional funding that we were able to get school districts like Hopkins to, with increased funding for special education. And so I will continue to work hard to improve that. And that's all I got. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Patty. Next, Greg Pullis.
Well, we obviously have a legal and a moral obligation to these kids with special needs. I have a different take on this. I think we need to get these kids back in school as quickly as we can. The governor's order and the MDA guidelines authorize us to bring these kids back to school, even in the hybrid environment. I think we need to try to do that. When you look at what these kids are facing and their families are facing, it all points toward the direction of bringing them back into school. Many of these kids depend for their nutrition in school. I don't know how you adequately do assessment from a distance standpoint. There are all kinds of risks that we're subjecting these kids to at home: sexual abuse, drug abuse. You've got the issue of suicidal thoughts. You've got emotional issues, depression. The achievement gap is certainly getting worse during this time. Brown University has done a study. These kids are being put back 3 months in reading and probably 6 months in math. Their social skills are impacted. Their communication skills are impacted. The CDC says we should get these kids back in school. The American Association of Pediatrics, Pediatricians wants us to get these kids back in school. We got to do it safely, protect them, and protect the people in the school, but we should get them back into school. As far as funding, yes, we need more funds. And I would first approach this from a federal level. So the CARES Act has got an education stabilization fund, and the governor's emergency education relief, and elementary and secondary school relief. We ought to look to getting more of those dollars. Are they available? Maximize those dollars. And yes, we do need to close this gap. We do need to address the needs of special education, and it should be fully funded.
All right. Thank you, Greg. The third question that was submitted to the candidates has to do with the proposed constitutional amendment that was
Gary
proposed.
didn't go yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gary.
It's all right. You can skip me.
No. Gary, your turn.
Okay, I'm always an afterthought in my family anyway. So. I think if you look at this question and answer it directly, it has nothing to do with funding. It has nothing to do with education in general. What it has to do with is how do we it does have to do with education, but the question is, how do we provide a good education for these special needs children during a pandemic? To have distance learning is not the answer, because these are children that really need to have be taught on a one-on-one basis. The problem is that on a one-on-one basis, we're putting them at risk. We're putting the teachers at risk of getting COVID-19. And so what's the answer? You can talk about being fully funded, but funding is not going to take care of the safety aspect of the pandemic, and how do we handle the process of teaching these students. And personally, I have to admit that I don't have an answer for this question. I think we have to leave it somewhat in the governor's hands. Governor has the emergency powers to handle a situation like this, and I think we need to rely on the experts that are giving him the advice and hope that he comes up with the proper solution that will allow for a proper education for the special needs students.
All right, thank you, Gary. Now, the third question that was submitted, a proposed constitutional amendment, and this is the one that was proposed by Neil Kashkari of the Federal Reserve Bank and former Justice Alan Page. This proposed constitutional amendment was brought forth last spring regarding the state's obligation towards public schools. Oh, I should probably share that. All right. It is designed to replace Article 13, Section 1, a part of the state's constitution since 1857. This proposed amendment is likely to resurface post-COVID-19. What is your opinion of the proposed changes to the current language, which does not include any provisions by taxation for funding Minnesota's public schools? And we'll go in order this time of Patty, Gary, Greg, and Ann.
All right. I think Minnesota is a great state to live in if you're white and you're middle class. And I think that we have incredible disparities in so many places that are highlighted, especially right now with the pandemic. And it's, they stem from financial wealth gaps to racial incarceration gaps, healthcare outcomes, and of course, what we're here to talk about today, and that's the K-12 education. And so we in Minnesota have some of the worst education disparities in the country. And it's something that we've been working on for decades and getting nowhere. And so I look at the opportunities of our school districts and the improvements that can be made. I think that I agree with what Steve said about the fact that this will come back to the legislature in our next session. And I think it's a great place for it to come and get hearings. And I think the legislative process is important. You have input and you learn from people who work in the field, educators and everybody who's impacted. And so it's a great opportunity to take an idea and to make it better. And so I'm looking forward to it actually coming to the legislature and the opportunity for us to work on this issue, because there isn't anything that's more important right now. We need all of our kids to succeed. I think, if we have a good education, that's the way that starts us out. I think that Greg made that point, having grown up in a lower income community, and the success that he made. Every child in our state deserves that same opportunity. And unfortunately, in our communities of color, we're not seeing that. And so we need to be working harder. We need to do better. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Patty. Gary Porter, your response. Unmute, Gary.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
I think this is an issue that is extremely important. I support it wholeheartedly. I think that we need to guarantee a quality education for every student across the state of Minnesota. Patty mentioned that the legislature passed increase of 2% in funding over the last session. The session before, I don't know what the percentage was, but they also increased the spending on education. But yet, let's take a look at what happened. After the last session in 2018, the gap continued to grow. And I would dare say that when we look 2 years from now, in 2022, with a 2% increase in funding, the gap will increase again. What we need to do is guarantee that we need to guarantee a quality education for every student across the state of Minnesota. Passing an amendment like this, in which we find that we make education more accountable, is the way to provide for a better education. I'm a firm believer that we need to fully fund education. But I'm not a firm believer of just throwing money consistently at education and hope the results will be better this time around. We're spending way more money in the poorer districts and we're getting no results. The wealthier districts we're spending less money, and yet they're 15 to 20% better results coming out of the wealthier districts. This has got to come to an end. And that's why Justice Page and I can't remember how you pronounce the name of the other gentleman, but came forward. What's that?
Neil Kashkari.
Okay, Neil Kashkari came forth with this kind of an amendment because it is essential that we get to the crux of the problem, find out why, after all the money we've spent, we still have this tremendous gap between the poorer districts and the wealthier districts. And until that happens, we're not going to have a good educational system in Minnesota.
All right, thank you, Gary. And finally, Ann Johnson Stewart.
I think Greg is next.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
That's okay.
I keep skipping somebody here. All right, Greg. Unmute. There we go.
Well, thank you, Ann, for protecting me here. Well, I oppose this amendment with every bone in my body. The objective is to close this achievement gap and to achieve racial equity in education. And it's absolutely true. We have tolerated for decades this achievement gap. I mean, in the third grade across Minnesota, only 30% of African-American kids are reading proficiently versus 65% for white kids. Intolerable. Guess what? If you don't read by the fourth grade, 80% of those kids will never catch up, ever. And guess what? 2/3 of those kids will end up in a jail experience or on welfare. African-American kids that don't read by the fourth grade are 7 times more likely not to graduate from high school. So it's absolutely intolerable. So the objective of this amendment, absolutely spot on. If you can't read by the end of the third grade, guess what? Your job opportunities are going to be less. It results in these inequities that we have. African-American, the average Black family earns $39,000 and whites earns $83,000. 1 in 4 Blacks owns a home, 3 in 4 whites own a home. Intolerable. But this amendment is not the way to go. We should attack it through legislation. I have a statewide K-3 reading program. Every kid has to read by the end of the third grade. We do that, we can make meaningful change in this achievement gap. Why is the amendment such a bad idea? Look, I'm a lawyer. I've looked at these words. A fundamental right, quality public education, fully prepare them. This is the keep all the lawyers fully employed constitutional amendment. We will have a legion of lawyers working on this thing for decades, and they'll spend zillions of dollars. And in the end, we won't get anywhere. We need a statewide K-3 reading program. Every kid reads by the end of the third grade.
All right, thank you, Greg. And now finally, Ann Johnson Stewart.
Thank you. So I find it interesting that Greg approached this from a lawyer perspective, and I agree with him on that. I approached it from a director of a education program perspective. I directed the construction management program at the university for 15 years and took it through an accreditation program, which was extremely rigorous. So when I read the amendment, my questions were, how do we prove quality? How do we how do we prove all of these things? I think it's very challenging from a teaching perspective to meet some of these subjective standards. So we both are looking at this from our own area of expertise. I fully support what Alan Page is doing here. I think it's fantastic that they're bringing attention to the achievement gap and they are trying to make some positive change around this huge problem that we have in Minnesota. And that has been stated over and over again. But I am hesitant to engage in changing our constitution until we fully explore this. So I'm not opting out here. I'm just being very careful when we take away the uniform requirements, when we take away the provisions by taxation, all of those things make me a little bit nervous. I'm worried when I see that students are to be provided a quality education, because I think quality is different for every person. It's measured differently. I'm nervous about standardized testing from both a teacher and a parent perspective. I think there's many studies that show standardized testing has proven biases and is problematic. I think the way we address the achievement gap is by looking at not just achievement gap, but also opportunity gap. And why are we spending more money at schools with lower incomes? Well, the parents are making up a lot of the money by doing, or a lot of that spending by spending from their own self to provide additional resources and opportunities. So with that, I'll stop, but I think this is an important issue.
All right, thank you, Ann. That concludes our questions that we provided in advance to the candidates. We've gotten some audience questions, and I'll pick one of those off of here. And we'll ask the candidates to respond in the following order. Greg, Patty, Gary, and then Ann. The first question that came in was, do you support vouchers, expanded tax credits, or other taxpayer subsidies for non-public schools? And why or why not? So Greg, please give us your response.
Well, I support tax credits for kids in the city. Look, I grew up in the city. I spent almost my whole life in the city until I claimed at Plymouth. I've worked downtown for so many years. I've worked on the north side of Minneapolis in education equity for 30 years. And the public schools in the city just have not worked for kids in the city. It's just a reality. And so we have those kids who are tied to those neighborhoods because that's where they live and they grow up and their parents are and their relatives are. And they don't have a good education in those schools. And it's not for trying. There have been terrific school superintendents for the city of Minneapolis. There are all kinds of great efforts going on, the North Side Achievement Zone. And these teachers are dedicated people working very, very hard in very, very difficult circumstances. But the public schools in the city just haven't done it for them. You can look at the data on the state test, the MCA tests, and you can see it. It's incontrovertible that these kids are simply not getting a good education and they're falling behind, and it results in lost job opportunities, and that translates into gross economic disparities. So for the kids in the city, I do support allowing those parents the choice to choose an alternative to what they have today.
All right, thank you, Greg. Next, Patty.
The short answer is no. I don't support vouchers and the like. I think that we do have schools that are struggling and they need more support, and I agree. And I think that in Minnesota right now we do have a lot of choice. I know that we have a lot of choice within our public schools. We have choice of charter schools, and we even have choice of districts. And so I think that families do have choices already. And so I think this whole concept is really about public funding for public schools. And we have, overall in Minnesota, we have a really good quality public school system. It just doesn't work for everybody. And so what do we need to do to our system to make it work for everybody? We need to be addressing the needs, the cultural needs, the the economic needs, we need to be helping families who need help. And that isn't the same in every, equal is not equitable always. And so we need to be working to help lift up those that need it and support those that need that support. And so, no, I do not support vouchers that are going to be giving funds to private schools. I just think that that is not an appropriate use of our tax dollars. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Patty. Next, Gary.
I have always been a firm believer in choice in school. I think that we are doing our students a tremendous disservice if we are forcing them to remain in schools that are not providing a good education. It's wrong when you look at what's happening with these students that are locked into these schools because they can't take advantage of the opportunities that are out there because they're not getting a good education. I think, the first thing we need to do before we look at choice is figure out how come these schools can't provide a good education. But by the same token, we can't hold the children hostage to those schools because we oppose choice and giving vouchers to allow these students to move forward. To me, the most important part of education is the child and making sure that that child gets a quality education. And if choice is the answer, then that's what I'm in favor of. I think that in districts like Hopkins, choice is not going to be a problem because the Hopkins School District is one of the top districts in the state. And you won't have to worry about the competition of students wanting to leave the public school system to go to the private school system. But there are others in the minority communities in which they're not providing the education that these children need, and they should have an alternative to be able to strive to provide for a better life for themselves. And the only way they're going to be able to provide for a better life for themselves and their families is by getting a good education. And if that means going to a private school through choice, then I'm in favor of it. I think if you look at minority families, the majority of minority families also favor choice. That's because they know if their children are going to get a good education, that's the way they're going to have to go.
All right, thank you, Gary. And finally, Ann Johnson-Stewart.
So I'm a firm no on this one. As I said in my introduction, my parents were public school teachers. They had 5 children. When we went away to college, they said 2 things. You get to go to any college you want as long as you pay for it, and it's a public school. So we all did. Luckily, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where I grew up, we had plenty of choices. I am a faithful Christian person. I am very active in my church. I am very happy to profess that faith. I am very nervous about religious organizations getting public money for schooling. The challenge, so I'd say no, I don't think we should fund private schools with public money, whether it's through a voucher or through a tax credit, which in fact is the exact same thing. And my blood gets a little hot about this. My company does a lot of work with ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I know from teaching classes to thousands of people that religious institutions do not have to meet the requirements of ADA. They are protected from doing that. So if my nephew wants to go to a church, he doesn't necessarily have to have access to it because the church is precluded from doing that. My church, Wayzata Community Church, decided we have a moral and an ethical and just a human responsibility. Our church is fully accessible, but many schools are not. Private schools also do not have to keep disabled students. They don't have to allow disabled students. They do not have to create individual development plans for disabled students. And this to me is outrageous. If they're not willing to accept the strings that come along with what we require of public schools, then they cannot have public school money. And I am very adamant about that. And I will protect the rights of disabled students as well as any other child who maybe isn't Christian or any other exclusionary factor for a private school. Absolutely no. Sorry, I'm mad about that.
Thank you, Ann. Well, we got a late start today, so we're nearing our time limit here, but we'll have one more question and we'll limit you to 1 minute on this question. And I think we'll pick this one here. How will you ensure that school nutrition departments remain fully staffed during these uncertain times? And that school meals are accessible to all students, regardless of the employment status of their parents? So this has to do with school nutrition. And this time we'll go in order of Greg, Patty, Gary, and Ann. I guess that's the same order we had last time. So Greg, what's your response to the school nutrition question?
You have to unmute him.
I got to count on Ann to get me in on all these. Thank you, Ann.
I
Well,
just want to hear your answer first before I go.
okay. Okay, so nutrition, absolutely critical for our kids, and it's really critical for children who come from poorer families, people of more modest means. So many of these kids rely on nutrition in our schools, so it's an absolute priority. And making it available as broadly as we can makes some sense. I would look to the CARES Act funding. I would look to the Education Stabilization Fund and the governors, the GEAR and the ESSER. And I would see that whether there weren't additional dollars there that could help us fund this. We're in a situation where going forward, funds are going to be very, very scarce. We should first try to optimize the way in which we get these federal dollars for these nutrition needs, which are absolutely essential.
All right, thank you, Greg. Gary, your response to this? Unmute, Gary.
There we go. I'm
There.
unmuted.
All right.
I think this is a serious problem from the standpoint that we can fully fund nutrition. But when you're talking about finding the workers to do this, that's where the problem is going to be. And businesses in general today are having a tough time finding people to work because they're afraid of the workplace. They're afraid of getting COVID-19 as a result of it. And how we solve that problem, I don't know. I've seen advertisements by various businesses looking for people to work and offering great incentives for people to come to work. I happen to be working in furniture sales right now, and we have one company one manufacturer in Mississippi that's offering $1,000 bonus for anybody who will come to work, and can't find anybody to work. That's the problem you face in in the nutrition area for schools, is how are we going to find the people to man or women or however you want to use it to handle this situation?
All right, thank you, Gary. Patty, your response.
Well, I think we all know and can agree that students can't learn if they're hungry. And so these nutrition programs, whether they're in school or at home, are crucial. And I will say I'm incredibly proud of the Hopkins School District and their kind of innovative ways of getting food to families and offering food to families. I have seen on, social media, since my kids aren't in the school district anymore, I don't have firsthand knowledge. This is the first time in a long time, but I saw on social media a post of an acquaintance that had picked up their lunches for that day. And so even though they're studying at home and doing distance learning, they were able to benefit from the food program at the school. And so I think, whether it's being creative about how we get those meals to students, whether it's using buses or however we're doing it, I think that's the important thing. We need to make sure we get the food in the kids' hands, and we need to look to partner at the state level and at the federal level to find ways to be able to help us fund that.
All right, thank you. And Ann, your response.
Yeah, I too have seen some of my friends take advantage of some of the nutrition programs, and I think that's an extremely important thing. We see that happen every summer with many children who rely on schools for their food and nutrition. I think given that right now we have an extraordinary situation with COVID and hybrid learning, we can be creative about our partnerships. And as Greg said, use CARES money and other special funding related to COVID relief. I also would, I will find out more about this, but I know that there's some private-public partnerships that are happening. I know because I've been asked to participate in them. I know that there's so many people have stepped up to help individually if they haven't been hurt financially by COVID. And I love the idea of schools allowing other parents to get involved and feel like they can share their own resources where others don't have any. So I think we can be creative, but this is a very important outreach.
All right, thank you, Ann. Well, we'll wrap up with with each of you making a concluding statement. And I think we'll limit it to 1 minute rather than 2. What's that? Oh, it is 1. Okay. We've got to get out of here for the next group coming in. But we'll go in this order: Gary Porter, Ann Johnson Stewart, Greg Pullis, and Patty Acom. So Gary, what's your concluding statement?
Well, I want to thank the Hopkins Legislative Coalition for providing us this opportunity to express our views on education. As I said at the outset, I believe education is one of the most important issues that the legislature faces. And I think the time has come that we have to begin to figure out how we can improve our educational system and closing the educational gap that is out there. One of the things that I am proposing is that I think the governor should appoint a task force made up of business, teachers, administrators, students, and parents to be able to find out and get to the core of the problem that our educational system is facing. To provide more and more money and get the same results every time just makes no sense whatsoever. So I think if we're going to bring about a more equitable system in our country so that everybody is equal, we have to also provide a quality education for all of our students.
All right, thank you. And Ann, your concluding statement.
So thanks again for having me. Thanks to this group, which is made up of many, many passionate volunteers, as well as your core staff, but just passionate volunteers who really care about education. You can find out everything you need to know about me on my website. What I want to say right here is, even though I'm an engineer, I have been a teacher for 25 years. I grew up with parents who were teachers. I have been a department director at the university where I administered a program. I found faculty. I understood objectives and performance measures. I went through a very rigorous accreditation process where I had to really measure whether our students were learning. And I also teach. I've taught thousands and thousands of adults and students about very technical topics and very not technical topics, things like road repair and guardrail maintenance. I think I am a proven communicator. I understand the value of education. I'm a mother and a grandmother. So I just want to be an advocate. And so thank you very much. And I'll stop right there.
All right, thank you, Ann. Greg, your concluding statement.
Well, I am passionate about education. We have excellent schools in this district, and I will do everything in my power to protect their funding. I think we got 2 big issues facing us in the legislature. First is a $4.7 billion budget deficit. We need to find a way. That's the most important thing for us with schools, is to preserve our funding as part of that budget resolution process. And so my TCF experience, I think I budgeted many budgets. I had to balance budgets. That I will bring to the legislature. Second big issue I think we face in education is equity in education and this achievement gap. We can't have only 30% of our African-American students reading proficiently in the 3rd grade. My 30 years working on the north side will stand me in good stead in attacking that achievement gap. I am passionate about education. Please vote for me, and you can visit me on my Facebook, Greg Pullis for Minnesota Senate. Thank you for having us today, LAC.
All right, thanks, Greg. And finally, Patty.
Well, thank you to the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition for hosting this today. It's been an honor to be here. As I said earlier, my roots in this community are deep and my commitment to the Hopkins schools is really strong. I'm running for re-election to the Minnesota House, and I hope I can count on your support. Education is hugely important to me. Funding this year is going to be incredibly challenging. And so the initiative I've been pushing for 2 years now is around preserving funding from schools. And so schools, it's called Solar on Schools. Actually, the second highest line item in a school's budget is energy, just behind staffing. And so if we can put solar panels on top of our schools that are perfectly designed with a flat roof, we can save them money that they can redirect back into the classroom. And so we need to be creative about finding ways to save our schools money so that they can use it on educating our students. And so pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Patty. And thanks to all of our viewers out there who have been watching today and watching in the future. This has been the Legislative Action Coalition, Hopkins Education Legislative Action Coalition Candidate Forum for 2020. Thanks to everyone. Bye now.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.